Yeah.
I think, okay, sit down. What time are we supposed to be done?
I put question mark.
I didn't have it either.
Advertising.
So I saw them, I didn't know.
I don't know. This is pretty thick. This is like a book.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. In that this is a special council meeting, we're going to open the meeting as we would any council meeting, and that is with prayer. And I've asked Councilman Hogaboam if he would open us in prayer, and then we will do the pledge, and so let's stand.
Let's pray together. Gracious Heavenly Father, we gather before you with heavy hearts as we think about our fellow Americans in Pittsburgh and those across the country. We pray, Lord, for your safety upon our communities. We thank you, Lord, for the first responders, some of whom are still battling to stay alive even this very moment, who walked into that horrific situation. We remember them, their families, the community of Pittsburgh in prayer. Lord, we ask for your wisdom to be upon this meeting as we all seek to be good stewards, and we know that there's much information that's been collected that will be shared. Lord, give us minds that can process the data well. Help us, Lord, to make good decisions that will benefit this community. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And let's start with roll call.
Rodriguez,
Here.
Bruner,
Here.
Hogaboam,
Here.
Levi,
Present.
Haverfield,
Here.
Scott.
Here.
Thank you. As we get started, I would like to start by thanking those that have worked diligently on this study. Patrick, it's been a heavy lift for you, and Westcott, you have put a lot of hours into this. And a lot of others have worked alongside. I know that our Public Works and Streets and Fire and Police and Parks, Darren, have put a lot of work into this. I would also like to say thank you to those of you that are here to listen and to learn. Today is a special council meeting. It is a workshop. This is the first time our council has had the opportunity to really review this and now talk about it. I think intent is really important. And I can speak for myself, but I think I can speak, and so if someone disagrees with me, you can tell me that. But I think we all, as we are here, our intent is to be good stewards of our community and to make wise decisions to the best of our ability. And we begin with that in having good information. And so I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I appreciate, Ann, the presentation you're going to give to us. And then our intent is to make wise decisions because we're all interested in the long-term benefit to our community. So with that said, Ann Westcott, I think you're on and you can walk us through the materials that you've provided.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's always dangerous when someone appreciates your presentation before you do it because now I have to do something worthy of that. Again, Ann Westcott with Galena Consulting. You've seen me numerous times. I first wanted to take an opportunity to also specifically thank the members of the advisory committee from the public representing the development community and taxpayers within the city. Their input, their perspective has been invaluable to me. We've had several long, very thoughtful meetings, and in addition to the staff, I really appreciate, and many of them are here this evening. So, when you're talking about being intentional about reviewing data, I've got a lot of data for you. What I've tried to do is, in addition to the report that you have, that I'm sure you all wanted to read, I gave you a cheat sheet, which is the 3-page summary of, if you didn't really read the report, just read this and you'll know what's going on. And then, at the last minute, I decided, hey, let's just kind of give everyone the PowerPoint too. And so whatever kind of learner you are, you should have some sort of material with which to follow along. I'm going to remind us that we met last May, kind of did a 101 impact fees, particularly for new council members, new mayor as well at that time. And that was designed to prepare you with the basics of how impact fees work, what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So I'm not really going to repeat that information today, but if you want to ask me to go over some of that, please let me know. We have 3 really big chunks of information today to talk about. We have conversations about what kind of capital is needed in order to keep your levels of service current going forward. We have a conversation about how impact fees might recover the cost of the growth-related cost of that capital. And then we also have a conversation about how will the city pay for their obligation. All of that's been totally figured out for your consideration, but I'm going to try and prioritize getting through the CIPs, the capital plans, and the impact fees in this meeting. And if we have time, I would welcome you to kind of do the deep dive into the transportation funding plan. I think many of you already have discussed it, you're up on it. I will weave it into my presentation, but just for time, I'm going to suggest that maybe if, as a council, you want to really get into a discussion about that proposal, that we try to just hold that off to the end. Particularly since we invited P&Z to come listen to this, and it's not their job to figure out how to pay for it, so they probably don't want to stay for that. All right. So just for members that are in the audience, impact fees, new growth does bring additional tax revenue, but it doesn't generally create enough new tax revenue that there's tons of money left over to build large facilities like fire stations. And in that case, in most municipalities, those things just don't get built, and then your level of service decreases. Impact fees allow new growth to pay their share of the capital needed to provide that service without requiring existing taxpayers to subsidize that. Impact fees are paid when someone pulls a building permit. They're only used for capital infrastructure, not for operations. So we expect that tax revenue to pay for firefighters and impact fees pay for the station. Can't be used to cure deficiencies. So if you already have bad streets, we can't make the streets better. We can just keep them the same level of bad going forward. And proportional share is really important, and we'll talk about that later, that it's my job really to find the data that helps me decide how much of the cost of any project is because of growth and how much of it is an existing need or required by the entire population. This is the easy math. How do I come to the impact fee? I have a total cost of what the capital improvements will be. I divide it by the number of new development units. That'll be a household or a non-residential square footage, and that's the fee. So there was your introduction. Did that wrap us all up from May? Is it coming back to us on that? Okay. So why are we updating right now? State law requires us to update at least every 5 years, but Nampa's growth situation has been changing so rapidly over the last 10 that we've been doing an update about every 3 years. Nampa's also a little more sophisticated than some municipalities in that they are updating their transportation plan more often than others, so they are on top of data changing, and then that can change this data. If you have no data, then there's no need to update things. Staff gives us a lot of data, so we know when it's time. So obviously, your rate of growth has changed dramatically since 2016 and is projected to continue in that trend. Equally important, costs for land and construction have increased so radically that the assumptions that I made 3 years ago are completely obsolete. You couldn't build a building for what we estimated before. City has a new mayor, new council members, new police and fire chiefs, so we have the possibility for a lot of new strategic direction, and we want to make sure that data represents your directives. We also have an opportunity to collaborate with the Rural Fire District. Rural Fire Districts in Ada and Canyon County are all doing impact fee processes and having the counties collect fees on their behalf. By bringing the Rural Fire District in our calculations with the fire department, we can spread the cost of new stations out by many more people, keeping the fee lower per permit, but also decreasing the amount of subsidy that the general fund may need to give. And this last one is, we have a proposed policy shift on how we fund streets. So we'll start with growth projections. I'm going to do police and parks together because I assess impact fees for police and parks just on the household or non-residential square foot metric. Fire will be its own thing because we're going to show you the combination of rural and city growth projections, and streets gets more complicated because we break it out by more land uses. So let's get rid of police and parks first, they're really easy. Updated growth projections. So we have, again, these are not the projections that I showed you when I started because that was just my first draft. These growth projections have many different sources have been added. The Impact Fee Advisory Committee is really helpful in this process to be bringing their own data sources in, feeling a sense of where the potential is for growth. So the advisory committee, and I should take a moment to step back, you also were given a memo that clarified to you that the advisory committee has approved the report as it stands. So any of the information that I'm giving you today has been vetted by them and approved in its current form. So population of the city of Nampa in 10 years, seeing about 22,000 new people, 9,700 new homes, and 4.2 million non-residential square feet. One of the things we're going to be seeing more in Nampa is this shift from residential to non-residential. When I started working for you 10, 15 years ago, it was like 95% residential and 5%, and we're really shifting that. So that's just something to notice in the numbers that things are changing. So we have an 80-20 split now. So let's start with the police department. So we talked to the police department about if you get 22,000 new people, and you currently have 1.15 police officers per 1,000, what are you going to need? Well, if we, yes?
Excuse me, Ann, if I could. Can any of you people see that from where you guys are sitting?
There are handouts.
Oh, they're handy, okay, because I just want to make
I
sure.
can't see it either. Do you see me squinting?
Yeah, right.
That's
Okay.
just me and my old ones, actually.
I'm not sure I can see this.
That's also very small.
Yeah. I see the seniors are laughing with me, so.
There are PowerPoint slides in the back, but they're printed two to a page, so you won't be able to read those either, but they're in color, so. Yeah, anyone's welcome to come up to the screen if you want.
And you'll talk us through it.
I will talk you through every bit of it, yes. All right, so we're just talking about growth, and we're saying how many officers would we need to keep the same level of service? In 10 years, the city will need to hire 26 new officers, additional FTEs, just to keep things the same as they are now. Now, the police department is also involved in its own strategic planning, and I know that it's been talking to council about, we're not really happy with the level of service we have now. We think that crime is becoming more complicated, we're getting larger, we need more officers today, let alone growth. But we don't know right now exactly how the city wants to address that. Number one, will they be able to fund? How many new officers will we be able to fund? I got a pretty good feedback that the council is aware and the administration has the intention to be hiring additional officers every year. So you're going to be at least keeping up with growth. So as far as the CIP, I'm only assuming the 26 officers for growth. If the council and the city decide that they have funding that they can provide to increase more than 26, that's going to bring your level of service up. That's fabulous, but it's not included in this because those decisions haven't been made yet. But in order to provide space for 26 new officers, we need about 18,000 square feet. And that's about a $4 million building if you were to build a new building just for that many people. Now, that's not just 26 people. That's 26 people and all the ancillary people. There has to be the parking, etc. 100% of that facility would be growth related. So you can see if you go across the top, it's a $4 million facility, 100% of it is growth related, so I'm including $4 million into the impact fee calculations. On the next line though, you have the police training facility, and it's something the police department is thinking through right now as well. I think I told you in May that when I do a capital improvement plan with my clients, I like them to put everything they know about into their plan, because you as elected officials deserve to know what we're thinking ahead of time, right? So we put this police training facility in, thinking it's 30,000 square feet. It's about a $5.8 million facility. Of course, part of that is growth related, but we don't really know what it's going to look like yet. And so I did not put any growth in that amount. Once you as a city decide what that's going to look like, when that's going to come, it might not even make it into this 10-year period, then we can put a growth percentage in and start collecting on that. The next section on vehicles, vehicle replacement. So we can't use impact fees for stuff you already own, but we did put that on there because it's $5 million. And you all know, as you just went through your budget process, that that $5 million has to come from somewhere, right? So this is sort of a reminder. But the next line is, for those 26 new officers, we'll need 13 new patrol cars. Because Nampa keeps their cars for 10 years, those are eligible for impact fees. Then we talk about, we have another 10 patrol vehicles if we do get extra officers for that increase in service level. That's not impact fee eligible. And then ancillary equipment that goes with the officers, weaponry, etc. So at this point, we have a CIP of $16.5 million, and if you go over to the right, about $5 million of it is impact fee eligible. Are you following me? Okay. The next line, there is a line for impact fee study. So the cost of the next impact fee update can be collected as part of the impact fee, so that's in there. $50,000 to do a standard of cover analysis. This is something that the departments do ongoing to assess where the threats are in providing public safety. It helps them cite capital facilities and therefore is impact fee eligible. And then I subtract fund balance. So they have $800,000 sitting in the bank. So I don't need to count that. I'm going to take that off. So out of the $15.8 million CIP, $4.3 million of it is impact fee eligible, and that leaves $11.5 million on the right-hand column for all of you to figure out in your spare time. So let's do the calculation then. Whoa. All right, so you take that $4.3 million on the top there. I'm going to break it out residential and non-residential, 80 and 20%. I'm going to divide it by the 9,700 new homes and the 4.2 million non-residential square feet, and that gives me a new impact fee per lease of $3.59 per house and 21 cents per non-residential. Now on the right side of this box, you can see, well, no one can see it, but I will tell you that it says that your current fee is zero, because I always want to compare and see how much is it changing. Well, remember 3 years ago, we sort of put a moratorium on the police fee, saying at that time we didn't really know what we were going to do, so we just stopped collecting. So there's been 3 years where no one had to pay a police fee, so it looks like a $359 increase in fees from zero. The current investment, though, remember I do current investment where I take the amount of inventory we own now and I divide it by who's already here to see how much of taxpayers already paid into the system. People who live in Nampa have already paid in $566 to the police capital inventory. So I at least feel comfortable as an analyst that the 359 is a number that does not exceed that, because that's kind of a red flag for me. But so yes, that's an increase because it was zero before. Do you have any questions about police capital?
Ann, I do have one question, and maybe it's too early to ask it. When we're talking about growth-related police facility, is it premature at this point to ask the question about the relocation of the fire department administration out of the public services building and the use of that building without having to build a new building for police?
Excellent point. We spent a lot of time in the advisory committee talking about this because one way to accommodate these 26 new officers is to kick fire and IT out of the public safety building, correct? Then we'll move them right in there. So that would seem like it's free. But it's not free because the city still will have to then house IT and fire. So what we sort of talked about is, we don't know where you're going to put these people. If you find a way to put these people in an existing building, the moving out of the other people is still a circumstance of growth. So either way, I'm going to need to pay for fire administration offices and IT offices, or I'm going to pay for a precinct, for example, for the officers. We don't know today what the best way is to provide police services. I would never know, actually. The chief and the mayor have not yet, come up with a hard proposal of this is how we want to do it. We want to go to a precinct model, or having everyone in one place is right. So absent that clear direction, the best I could do at this point is to say it is eligible for us to plan to house these 26 officers and ancillary employees in the same amount of square foot per officer as we do right now. So that is likely to change, Councilmember, you're right, and we talked about that a lot. Depending on the direction council goes in how to deploy those resources, you may have a different idea of what the building looks like or how big it is, which is why we'll want to continue to update it.
So your point is, we're eligible for that amount, whether we choose to take that amount or not, or if there's a different formula that's used further in the capital improvement plan. Have you taken into consideration fire department growth and such, so that this might not need to happen, or is that not considered, knowing that you're looking at trying to house 26 officers in a growth pattern outside of their growth?
Because I don't know the answer, I'm keeping it as academic as possible, and I'm keeping the building of a precinct with the officers so that it's all in one package.
So my question then, and I'll stop, your further analysis as far as in developing the impact fee, is it based upon numbers like this that could change, or the final numbers that you're going to be developing something that's more firm? Is there still some area for consideration on our part to lessen an impact fee, to try to lessen the economic
Yes.
impact?
So this is the one piece in the police CIP that if council wanted to have discussion on, actually right now we do want to decide where we're going to house these people. If you want to make that decision now, we would hold the police fees off until you made that decision, and we'd make some changes. So if you said, we're going to kick them out and put police in here, I would take that building off of here. There would be hardly any police fee, but I would put a building in for fire administration on the other side. And I don't know if that would be apples to apples, but that's what I'd have to do. So, excellent question. I have used the data I know for sure today. If you're real close to knowing for sure what you're going to do in the next 10 years, we should stop and revise it. If not, this is legally defensible, and we'll get you through until you have more clarity.
And if I could
Councilmember?
state that, so, as Ann said, we didn't put these numbers on the fire side. Fire just reflects new stations and what that growth is, not space. But in addition to the 26 officers, that's growth only. That isn't raising our level of service. And so right now, I think the average level of service of a city is at 1.5 or 1.45?
1.15.
Well, but the average, the standard that
Oh, what you're
is
supposed to have.
1.5, I believe. We're at 1.15 currently.
Yes.
So we're significantly below. And so if we were to if we had the privilege of getting our level of service up, not accounting for growth, the current facility wouldn't house that. In fact, right now, I don't know if it would house the 26 officers in the 10 years. So it may be a little bit of both.
And again, maybe we're getting into the weeds too much, too early on in the presentation, but 26 new officers are on duty at one time, are they? Are we talking about split shifts? And that's a question that I would ask the police department.
Right.
So, when we start looking at splitting hairs and the reality behind the true costs associated with the growth, same thing with the automobiles. You're not providing 26 new automobiles, you're providing half that amount. So that's why I don't want to get into the weeds. I just wanted to ask the question now instead of at the end of the of your dialogue say, well, what about?
Yes.
Do we have any room for them?
This CIP reflects the most extensive case possible. This will ensure that you have, within the law allowed for impact fees, been able to house those 26 people. You have a lot of options underneath that cost, and that is definitely a question for council to decide.
And they're good questions.
Okay,
So thank you for bringing them forth, because I'm sure we'll come back to it.
we'll come back.
Let's look at parks and see if we follow that one along. Okay, so we have 3.2 acres of parkland for every 1,000 population. That is a very good level of service in this region. In order to continue that for these 22,000 new people coming, that would allow us to have about 70 acres of new parkland developed. So you see that on that front line. Why is it 69 and not 70? Because when you add Ora, Brant, and Midway, it's just 69. So there's a bonus 1 acre that's not included in there. So in the next 10 years, impact fees can pay for 100% of the development of those two parks, because those two will then keep that 3.2 acres per 1,000 elevated. The trail development, that is on the CIP, but you'll see it's 0% growth related. That's only because you already have a grant assigned for that. I could have growth pay for some percentage of this, but because you already have $1.5 million identified, that will not go into the calculations. Under parks amenities, we had a lot of discussion about this. One pool to serve new growth, so this would be a third pool. I believe north, is north the answer? Yes. On the north side, $2.5 million, we had a lot of discussion about this too. That's not a big pool. That's a relatively neighborhood-sized pool. But we knew that we wanted to, at least the mayor's direction and parks staff direction was that that pool was really important. We already knew that the existing pools could only accommodate existing demand and still had wait lists. And so with 22,000 new people, we would definitely need that third pool. The soccer park, 45 acres, of course part of that would be impact fee eligible. But until y'all figure out where you're going to get even part of $11 million for a soccer park, mayor, staff, and I decided we would stick it on there so it's sort of a reminder of something that's formulating, but not assign any of it to growth at this time. So there's a point at which, and this goes back to the police station, when I know something is going to happen, but I don't know exactly how, I'll put a reasonable placeholder in it. If I know something wants to happen, but no one has an idea how, I won't put it into the impact fee calculations in that draft. Lighting for adult softball. This also is one we talked about a lot. And essentially this is by adding lights to the fields, you vastly increase the amount of field use that's available without having to build new fields. So because the demand for the field space is also coming from growth, that 22% is the growth rate that we're anticipating. So that's how that got in there. The skate park, not really driven by growth. It was decided that that's probably more appropriately a general fund responsibility. So if you add those up and subtract the $1.9 million you already have in fund balance for parks, you have a $16.5 million CIP, growth-related CIP. We divide this only by residential uses, so if I divide 16 million by 9,700 homes, that's almost $1,700 impact fee. You're currently charging $1,242, so that's $457 more. Current investment by people already living in Nampa, everyone owns about $3,600 worth of park stuff right now. Do we have questions about parks? The projects, the calculations?
And?
Yes, sir.
How do you come up with the current investment on the Parks Direct?
Current investment is, and this is in your report, but I didn't put it in here because it's kind of superfluous information, but You'll see in the report, in every section, there's an inventory. So I go through all of the stuff that the department owns that is capital eligible, i.e. it lasts for 10 years. So for parks, we would list all of the parks that you already own that are developed, and we would say if we had to buy and build all of these parks again today, how much would they cost? And then we value the rec center, and we value the dump trucks, things like that, whatever more is what we're using, and then I divide that by who's already here. That's what the current investment is. And it's not anything that's required by statute. It's a way for me to just sort of see if I'm asking growth to pay more than people already here have paid, that's just a red flag for me that that's not probably a good idea. On the other side, sometimes it can be really difficult to increase an impact fee, just, politically, or it's a sensitive subject. It can be helpful for the public at large to understand how much existing residents have already paid, just sort of as we go into this, where does the burden lie kind of conversation. Anything else on parks?
Exactly. And just one last question. When we're talking about growth-related, when we say $16.5 million available for growth-related items listed for parks, are you talking about in impact fees or with the city participation as well?
So if you look on page 12, you'll see that the total CIP for the next 10 years is $30 million. The growth-related portion of it is only $16 million. Not only, that's actually a lot of money, but is $16 million. So the remaining $13.9 million is the trail development that you already have a grant for, that soccer park that you're under no obligation to pay for. It's just sort of giving us an idea that it might be in the planning. And then the non-growth related portions of the lighting and the skate park. Did that answer your question?
No. You said page 12. Are you talking about this?
Slide 12.
Was
They should be numbered in the bottom left. Oh, I guess that looks like 13.
13.
Look at the park CIP.
Yeah.
So it looks like this.
It's on page 7 in our
Right.
packet.
So would you mind repeating what you just said?
Okay.
As far as,
So this had a color. So you see the bottom line of this CIP is a $30 million capital plan. That's how much all of this stuff would cost. But when I take just the amount of stuff that the proportionality for growth, it's 16 million. So 16 million goes into the impact fee calculation. The remaining 14 million is the general funds problem.
okay,
And if you
so,
look in that right-hand column, that 1.6 million, you have a grant for that. The 11 million is the soccer park. You're not obligated to spend that. It's just for you to start thinking about. And the lighting and the skate park are the non-growth related portions of those two projects.
so for clarity then, when we're talking about Parks and Rec, a 10-year CIP of 30 million, correct?
Half of which is impact fee.
Half of which is impact fee, and then the city's participating if they choose to in the other half.
Correct.
So what is the obligation that the city has in going through this impact fee formula basis? Are we obligating the citizens to pay the additional amount at this point?
We'll actually get to that part later where we talk about required and discretionary obligation.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Fire, okay to move on? Okay, so again, I think you're all up on this, that we have an opportunity, the rural fire district has an opportunity to go to the county. They'll actually be, we're supposed to be meeting with the commission next month. The commission seems very amenable to the idea. I think we have the votes to have this work, that they will collect for the rural fire districts in the county. What we decided to do was, since the city of Nampa provides fire services for the rural district under contract, it's the same service area, it's the same firefighters, and you all use the same stations and apparatus. So it doesn't make sense to do two different impact fee studies because you're all using the same stuff. The benefit to the city is by including Nampa Rural in this process, we're spreading the cost of the CIP out of far more people than we would otherwise. So I think this is good timing for the city and a win, and in my mind, appropriately shares the cost, because right now, if you're living in the unincorporated part of the county, you're not paying. I mean, yes, people pay taxes to the district, and the district hires the city to provide services, but those operating contracts do not always recover the full cost of capital, especially when capital costs are doubling every year. All right, so here are our updated growth projections. We have, those 22,000 new people in Nampa and another almost 12,000 new people in rural fire. I was really surprised when Compass and the other data points were adding up. That's a lot of growth right around your city. And no one really looks at where your border is, right? They kind of think you're from Nampa if you're in that area. So when we look at population, instead of those 9,700 households that we've been using in our other calculations, that's 13,000, more than 13,000 homes, and then 4.6 million non-residential square feet. So that changes that 80-20 to an 85-15 breakdown. Are you with me? All right, now we get into fire. Okay, so I'll tell you a little background on the last update with fire. At that time, data was saying we needed fire station 6 and 7, and we had 6 and 7 in the calculations. But having those 2 stations in had the fee come out pretty high. And the decision by the administration was to just defer station 7, kind of keep things normal, and we'd get back to that issue when it was time. Well, 3 years later, much faster growth pattern. Now it's time to get 7 back on, we believe. The fire department, in my report, has provided quite a lot of data on the number of calls, the areas where those calls are occurring, and areas within your coverage map where calls are not adequately covered. Do any of you remember reading that? The mayor does.
Yes.
Okay. It's really beautiful. It's colored, which I always think, just add color sometimes, it really helps. It's on page 19 and 20 of your long report. On page 19, you'll see there is a map that shows where your existing stations are, serving both rural and the fire department, and then it shows you where the next stations might be. Now remember, you pretty much have a good idea where 6 is going to be. Can't commit to where 7 is going to be at this point because we're not sure if that growth is going to be up here, down here, or to the side. But on the next page, you have what's called a heat map, where the department has mapped the calls, and you can see everything is pretty much well provided, except in this, what currently is your southwest area. The southwest area is not within enough minutes of a fire station, and you have an increasing number of calls there. So if I were to decide today, I would decide to put 7 there. But you're not going to build 7 today, so you're going to continue to watch this information, and the fire chief's responsibility is to continue to keep you updated on where that would need to go. But either way, it's pretty clear that this amount of growth is going to require 2 stations. If I look across all of the fire impact fees I've done, this is about the 12th one this year, I am finding a pattern that every 10,000 new people tend to trip a station. Now, of course, it's different if there's a community that's building really densely, that won't happen. And if there's a community that's really spreading, it could be more than that. But when you see there's 22,000 or 30,000 people coming and we have 2 stations on here, that seems right to me. So you will see we have 2 stations on here, and 100% of the cost of those 2 stations is growth related. Between the time that 6 and 7 will be built, an interim strategy for handling calls is to remodel station number 2 and 4 to add a squad vehicle. And I know, am I correct that you've talked about this a little bit before? So by having that not as big as a fire engine but bigger than your sedan kind of vehicle, given a bay and a fire station, you can deploy at a much lesser cost a team that can respond to smaller medical, etc., more cheaply than you can by deploying an apparatus. So that obviously, we would not be trying to do an interim strategy if not for growth. We just keep doing what we're doing today. Then you'll see each station needs an engine. We have a quint or ladder truck. The ladder truck, the state rating board recently told the city that because they don't have a ladder truck and the amount of height that's being approved in the city, that's going to downgrade the city. So by purchasing this quint ladder that's required by growth, it will also keep your ratings in a more appropriate place. And we know that fire ratings have a lot to do with how much people pay for their fire insurance. So we had a very long conversation about this with the committee, and that's how we came out. There's the squad vehicle, growth-related support vehicles. So in each station, there's a battalion chief. They usually have a vehicle. All of these up to here are growth-related, and then you see $5 million to replace existing apparatus. That goes in that far right column. That's a general fund problem. Then we get into the equipment. There's the breathing apparatus. The replacement is not growth-related, but the new ones needed for those new crews are growth-related, et cetera, et cetera. There's $40,000 for their standard of cover. And that map that I just showed you is the kind of data that comes out of this standard of cover analysis. So out of a $15 million, almost, capital improvement plan for fire, and remember we're talking fire, the city and the district, 8.7 million of it is growth related. The remaining 6 million is the general fund or the taxpayer's obligation. And that takes us to $560 for an impact fee for residential and 28 cents for non-residential. So this is also a funny one. We're comparing 560 to 185. I've never seen a fire fee that's 185. I mean, that was a really low fee because we decided to take one of the stations off. So you'll see later on in the report and in this presentation that if we look across the whole valley at fire fees, even 560 is in the lowest of all of the fire fees. But it is a $375 increase, and so really if in the most simplistic way someone were to say, why are you raising my fire fee by $375? The answer is we're buying 2 stations instead of 1 in a 10-year period. Questions about fire? Oh, Chief Roberts, no one cares. Are you even here? You're hiding. All right.
Council, I have a question.
Yes.
On the fire, it sounds like you debated 1 or 2 last time, you put 2 on this time. Is there precedent for doing like prorating a second station based on
There is.
projected?
And in some cases, I will do that. So in Middleton, for example, they almost need a whole station, but not quite. So I pushed half of the station on to the next 10-year period so that it could kind of keep everything together. From the data I've seen from the fire department, 7 is late. We might actually have put 8 on, but I mean, I can just tell you that would be a huge fee, and it didn't seem like. But 7 was what everyone agreed. 2 new stations in 10 years would at least keep you in that same 5-minute response.
Yeah. And, another question, kind of follow up on Councilman Haverfield's questioning about police fees. If the spacing is dealt with in vacating part of the current public safety building, either IT or fire, the money that's collected for police that's projected towards, say, new construction for that space, if the money was collected, and let's say IT is vacated and we have to find out a way to locate IT,
Didn't pay for it.
are you allowed to transfer the money? It's fungible and that, I didn't know what the legal parameters
I
were.
mean, we'd need to put some, this really has never happened before. We need to put some reasonable paper trail in order. One way of doing it is, what I would probably do is actually take it off the police CIP, buy fire administration space in the fire CIP and collect the money there. Right, so it can only be on one or the other rather than having to transfer money, but you can. Someone can lend, The accounts can lend to each other, you just need to have a paper trail.
Okay. The police to fire seems somewhat reasonable, but IT isn't something that, IT space isn't in our CIP for impact fees.
Well, if we really wanted to think this through, I think a case could be made that in order to accommodate new police officers in existing city space, the city would have to go buy space for IT. I think that is a growth-related expense as a result of growth in the police commands, the public safety center. So I would say whatever the cost is of moving police in, whatever it costs you to move the other people out is still a growth-related cost of growth. We just don't know what the plan is specifically at this point.
One quick final question. I know the projected growth, the numbers you gave, is that based on Compass projections?
It's based on about 5 things now.
Okay.
So it's...
Because it's a little bit off from what the Compass projections are. Compass has a little bit of a higher projection, and Compass has also underestimated our current projected growth over the past decade, so I'm wondering if that number should be higher.
Directly from the analyst at Compass. So what he was doing for me is pulling out transportation zones in the city and in the fire districts. And then this also is tempered a little bit with what the advisory committee is feeling is going to be happening in the community. I look at Collier's development report. They do an annualized report. So the number is probably comfortably in the middle of the highs and lows of projections.
Okay, thank you.
The good news is, if we're wrong about the growth, if you grow faster, you collect money faster, you'll just, in your next update, put the next station on, for example. If you grow slower, you'll collect less, and so there's no way where people can be asked to pay more than is their share.
Mayor, if I may, and I probably should probably know this answer, but there again, piggybacking off Councilman Hogaboom. So the IT, using that as an example, who is the final decision maker on whether that could be considered growth as far as moving
I'd
IT?
have a discussion with your city attorney.
Okay, so the city attorney is the one who, there's not a state attorney or someone above that makes that call?
Really, no one is making any calls on impact fees. It's sort of just case law. So
Okay.
case law for the last 20 years, I document everything I do and run it by people. This is a weird enough little thing that I think city and attorney and I might call other attorneys and say, you know, what would you do?
See if there's a precedent.
I would go back to the advisory committee, quite frankly. I mean, I think that's enough of a decision that we would need to go back to the advisory committee and say, okay, here's the idea for how we're going to provide space for the police officers, and here's the downriver implications of that. What do you think about the solution? So I wouldn't hastily make that decision. I mean, unless you know the answer today, then I suppose you can be very hasty.
Unless there's a citizen group or someone that wants to kind of battle that, otherwise it's pretty
Right,
much
and
agendas.
so that would be something that we would really want to think through all of this. We would want to check, and I would have to defer to the city attorney if the development community wanted to appeal that strategy. I mean, my counterpoint would be, okay, then we have to go build a $4 million building. I mean, it's probably a cheaper strategy to do it that way than the $4 million building. So I think what I usually think is best is to bring people to the table and discuss it.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Clayton. So what I'm getting at is anything that's growth-related concerning, our fire department or IT or police, fire, and parks, it's up to the discretion of the council and the mayor to see and determine their best use. Is that correct?
I know that if you adopt this impact fee report and collect impact fees accordingly, you are saying this is our capital improvement plan. We know that plans change, and so every time that you decide you need to change, if you have a new council or you come into a windfall of money, and, whatever changes, you will update the CIP. So that's sort of this ongoing conversation between the legislative branch, the administrative branch, and the public. So ultimately, yes, staff tells me this is what we need. I vet it with the committee. I say this is legal, we can put this in, And then you as a body say, yes, this is our intention, this is how we plan at this point to provide these services, and as I'll ask you later on, and we're good for the non-impact fee side, that kind of conversation. And you are expected that it will change frequently, and that's why we update.
I see. Thank you.
We're not, Mayor, we're not going to get a windfall of money. We're not legalizing marijuana or anything like that. It's not on your agenda. Okay. Okay, I just...
You know, I was in Canada last week. I was waiting for something really exciting to happen.
I
in
just see where
Massachusetts.
Huntington, what they're getting. Oh, my gracious. Okay.
Well, you do know that in about a month, we'll be briefing you on your fiscal impact analysis, so maybe I can show you how to get your windfall there legally.
It's going to be good. I look forward to it.
Good.
All right, are we ready to do streets? Does anyone need a break? We okay? Are we okay? You ready? All right, don't say anything unless I point at you. All right, streets, the strategic direction. 20 years ago, when I was a budget analyst for Salt Lake City, we hired someone to do a big analysis of our capital infrastructure, the airport, public works, everything. And they said, well, you're about $600 million short. Okay, well, that's not, too much money, $600 million. And the council's kind of like, that's just overwhelming. I mean, what can we do? Well, we'll just keep plodding along, putting as much as we can put in. And we had a member of the citizen committee say, you know what, it feels like we're digging a hole with a backhoe and filling it in with a teaspoon. And that's always really stuck with me, that it's so hard as elected officials with the limited amount of pie that you have to meet all of the citizen expectations. But streets is the one thing that will get into a deferred situation so fast, and it's really hard to get out of it. So as the Transportation Master Plan was being updated this year, and again, it's my understanding that many of you have been in these conversations, so you're relatively aware of what I speak, that there really kind of was okay, we as a community are going to have to do something about this, and we need to kind of think out of the box. So the CIP that I put before you today is the CIP that was provided by Tom and by Jeff, and reflects all of the conversations in those open houses and conversations they've had with you, and is fiscally constrained, meaning that if you approve impact fees and the general fund funding strategy, we can afford all of this. So that's my setup for this. So we'll just say, baseline, you've been spending about $3.5 million on all of your streets. That's maintenance and operations. And if you keep putting the $3.5 million in, you'll go from a level service from D to F. And that's okay, because you only have so much money, right? That's just what's going to happen. Is that what you want to happen is where we get into the policy question. Now, the Transportation Master Plan is telling you it would take $20 million a year to meet citizen expectations, stop the service level decline, improve safety, provide connectivity, and support future growth. So that's not just the growth part. $20 million will take care of your problem. It's not ideal because he could spend $40 million a year. Well, it's not even you anymore. He could spend $40 million a year. But because he is so professional, they have fiscally constrained it to, for just $20 million a year, they can solve these problems. So in the next two slides that you totally can't see, and you hopefully can read in your, did you bring big copies? And Jeff was supposed to bring big copies, but he didn't. No, can you generally see what's in your report? There's a two-sided piece. So what I want to tell you about the CIP is,
Generally.
if you pull it really far behind you, is, okay, so you look at the CIP, and I'm going to jump forward and back from the CIP, but what you're going to see in the CIP is a list of all of the projects. These are signals and intersections, roads and bridges, and roadway projects, i.e. widening a road. The total cost, you'll see a column for percent match. That means there's a grant available, and that's the portion the city has to put in order to get the grant money. Other agency costs means it might be the state, it might be the highway district, et cetera. They're going to pay for that portion of the project. Then you see City of Nampa cost. That means after we take care of those other agencies, here's how much. $70 million. So of $195 million worth of projects that need to be done in 10 years, that's where the $20 million a year comes from. $126 million of that will come from other nice people that, thank you very much, don't even live here. I mean, they might live here because it's state taxes too, so again, they do pay registration. But that leaves $70 million. So now we're down to $70 million over 10 years that the city needs to be able to fund. So the math in my head is we're paying $3.5 million now, and that includes impact fees, right? The $3.5 million you're paying annually includes the amount you use for impact fees. So the $3.5 million you're spending now is general fund and impact fee money. And this CIP is telling you need $7 million a year in order to get all of this done. Now I'm looking at, if I spend $70 million, someone else is going to pay $126 million, and I can get all my stuff done. I mean, for the outside person, that just seems like, wow, that's a pretty good deal. As I've told you before, I have very few clients who know how to work the grant game like Nampa does. I don't know what it is about you, but very few other people have, I guess it's past work experience that helps. Hey, relationships. Okay, but $70 million is still a lot of money, right? That's $7 million a year. That's twice what you're currently paying. So then we go into a column that says, well, how much of that $7 million a year is impact fee eligible? And you'll see those percentages. So then we say, okay, of that $70 million, how much is growth related? At the bottom of this slide here, okay, it's not working out. This red circle is supposed to be circling the $40 million. See that? So $40 million of the $70 million is growth related. Actually, more. It actually could be much higher. What's interesting is if you have a project, let's say I have a project to widen a street, and the only reason I'm widening it is because of growth. That entire $5 million project could be impact fee eligible. But because we got a grant to take care of 93% of it, all we need the impact fees for is the 7.3% match. So that's a pretty good deal, right? I mean, legally, growth could pay for an enormous amount of roadway infrastructure. Because you leverage grants, we're not put in that position. So if by some magic you could come up with $40 million of impact fees, and the city had $27 million of other funds, you could meet all of these needs. Do you understand that? As I'm waving my arms, am I making some sense? Okay. So looking away from the numbers, once again, $126 million of the total CIP will come from state funds and grants and other agencies. $60 million of the total CIP will need to come from city. So my math says that's an average of $6.7 million a year. It doesn't have to be the same amount every year, and it can be different sources in different years. Staff has proposed including growth-related roadway projects in the streets impact fee calculations, and increasing the amount of tax and other revenues from the general fund to solve this problem, or to be able to meet this $6.7 million a year. Now, I'm going to go back and remind us that roadways have never been in the streets fees calculations. So we've always had this conversation, and I think back in May I really tried to do a re-education on why are Nampa streets fees so low or lower than other people. It's because they don't pay for the same stuff. So this was an exercise in what if we had growth pay for roadways too, and didn't try to subsidize it through exactions or taxpayer funding. So we're going to show you in a minute how we figure out how we can get the $40 million. How we're going to get the $27 million is the conversation that Jeff and Tom have already been having with you about allocating the 1% of your 3%, some conversation about reallocation of your general obligation grant, bond that will be sunsetting, and some potential opportunities in vehicle registration fees. Now that part I want to put on the back burner. I just want you to know that's what I'm talking about at this point. Okay, this makes sense, you already knew this? Awesome. Okay, so by increasing the scope of the impact fee calculations and the amount of general funds, that allows you to get up to the $27 million that we need from the city, and that trips your ability to get $37 million in grant funding. So this is something I also look at about, is our ability to leverage dollars. Councilmember Rodriguez, do you have a question?
I'm thinking as you're talking is this, because one of the things that I'm looking at is staff has proposed including growth-related roadway projects in the streets impact fee calculations. It goes on to say combined with an increase in the amount of tax revenues
Right.
directed toward road projects.
Right.
What are the tax revenues you're referring to?
So it's, I think you had a conversation that every year when you take your 3%, that you might earmark one of the 3% towards streets. So
I
that's a
see.
set amount
Right.
of money. And then you have a general obligation bond that will be retired. Is that something you want to then refocus into streets as well? Then, and all of these funding sources are very well aligned with the concept of street users. Then if you were able to raise the vehicle registration fee by $25, that's actual users. And I'll show you in this pie chart that I have, what I like about this strategy as a policy analyst is that it pretty much equally shares the pain. It's painful. You know, filling in with something bigger than a teaspoon is going to be painful. But I'm really impressed with what staff has done, and that I think they are at least coming to you with a plan that is equitable in its pain assignment.
Well, I say it because we have different funding sources for roads,
Correct.
and so that's why I wanted to clarify.
When I say city funds, I mean anything that you use in your city budget other than impact fees to pay for streets.
I see.
So it could be gas tax money,
Right.
it's your vehicle registration, so you're using your gas tax money right now. That's what goes into that $3.5 million that you're using right now. And what I think staff has been saying is, we need even more clear certainty from council that this stream of money will, I mean, obviously you can't adopt a budget for the next 10 years, but you can say, as your legislative intent on record, we intend to use this combination of general fund sources to meet our obligation. We will ask the development community to meet their obligation. We will leverage with grants, and we will take all the money we can from other agencies, and we're going to be able to solve this problem.
I see. Okay.
Ann?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
A question about what we would be approving as far as obligating ourselves to. I think along the lines of Councilman Rodriguez's questions, there's discussion here about partial bond reallocation, and members of the community have been asking me about that, because the general, just to be clear, the GO bond doesn't, when that is retired, it doesn't automatically become discretionary money to spend. It's a policy decision.
A public
and
one,
yes,
yes.
it's a very public one. We've avoided the semantics associated with what would need to take place, which would be taking foregone into the budget capacity when the GO bond expires.
I mean, there are a lot of different strategies.
Yes.
There's a ways that you can continue that funding, the law allows you to continue that funding stream for a different thing. I mean, yeah, none of their plan is without any emotional stress.
Okay, no, I've seen it multiple times in open houses, and
But you're
no one
right.
has yet opened up the bag and spoken candidly with what that would actually require.
So what I'm hoping is that if I lay all of this out tonight, and we at least understand how the impact fee part works, I am imagining that council will probably then want to have another calendared meeting that really digs into the dirt of this, because All I'm doing in this is saying, there seems to be a reasonable plan to get you to $7 million a year. Might not be in the first couple years. I know the plan sort of is, let's use this money here, and then it will be supplanted by this money. I feel what I have to do is make sure if we take money from the development community, will the city be able to pay the non-growth part? So I say, Tom and Jeff, you can be able to come up with $27 million? And they say, well, we have a plan. I say, have the council approved the plan? No, but they know about the plan. So this is perfect timing because this is me being able to marry my Lego block with their Lego block. It also will have something to do with your fiscal impact Lego block that's coming. And all of this data will be able to inform your decision. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if I could say, so needless to say, and I don't know, I think everybody probably knows this, but I'll comment on, when you look at the Compass Transportation Plan and you look at a map of Ada County and Canyon County, and funded is blue and unfunded is red, Ada County is funded. Most of their street improvement plans are blue. Ours are almost all red because Ada County has a totally different funding plan through ACHD. They're not, the local municipalities are not funding street improvements through the general fund. And so we will be looking in the coming years at different options for how to fund. Ada County right now is doing, I think it's a $75 increase, right, that devote to increase so that they have those fees available to fund their streets. We're going to have to do something. And so it'll be a longer term strategy to say, how do we fund streets long term? And so it's looking at different mechanisms, right, to get there, but getting there is not an option. Otherwise, we move to F in streets. And the one thing our citizens have said is that streets are important, and they want us to work on streets. And so it's not an easy project, but I have a question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Does, when we're talking about the impact fee and the allocation, the match, do we have to have finally identified what that funding match is at the time? We just know that we have to get there, and so in that we can review our plan every year.
Yes.
If we see significant change, we can adjust.
If you know today that there is no way you will ever attempt to put more than $3.5 million into streets a year, then we can't go ahead with this. If you, as a council, are at the point where you know $3.5 million won't do it, and you're having hard conversations about how to do it, and you're not exactly sure, I mean, in order to do the vehicle registration, you're going to have to go through a process and get approval anyway. So you have kind of a basket of ideas, three different scenarios, you know, that if you put it together this way, that will get you to there. What I need to hear from you is that you have either do or do not have an intention to get to there. And I will show you, for example, this is not all going to be built tomorrow. So if we started today saying, yes, we're going to collect this much from the development community and the city's going to put in this much, and something happens and we hit a recession and that's totally not, I mean, 1% is not going to be anything, then everything's new again and we start again. I just can't pretend that you're planning to spend money on streets if you have no intention of doing so. You don't have to tell me how. You just have to generally tell me, and there's clearly quite a lot of documented proof that you are putting together a plan. Is that
Thank you.
enough? Yeah.
Thank you.
And Madam Mayor, I just want to comment with what you said about ACHD, so that's really interesting, and that was a lot of the misinformation last spring where people were saying, well, Meridian's fees are so much higher. Right, because Meridian is in the highway district and their fees are like $5,000, and we're paying $300 in Nampa. It's not apples to apples, it's not the same thing. What you have before you is you may be stepping up to the next league, right? This may be the point in which Nampa says, we actually are a big enough community that we may need to think differently about how we fund things. And as we'll see in a moment, those fees are going to be like fees in Ada County because you're going to be delivering the same amount of service. So here's this pie chart that I like because Well, I personally would be more interested in speaking to the community about how the pain is being shared than if it were like taxpayers paying 90% of it and something else. So this is clear. There's a lot more money that's going to need to go into it. But if the priority in Nampa is streets, and we know through your surveys that that is one of the high. Is it before public safety? I mean, streets is big. By the way, I really appreciate the entry into the city now. It's so much better than before. So, this is how the blocks that we're putting together. I just like this because it's essentially equal. The people paying the most are other agencies. Now, yes, people in Nampa pay state taxes, et cetera. They pay, so that they're part of the purple as well. But it does show that if as a community we agree this needs to be done in order to continue to sustainably grow and have a level of service that makes us happy to be in Nampa, we will all have to pony up some. Okay, so here's your fee calculation. So I take that $40 million. I am going to divide it. You see these land uses here. So when you do streets, you don't talk about how many units there are, you talk about trip generation. So there's a standard, there's a national document that tells us how many vehicle trips a single-family house, a multifamily house, retail, office, industrial will use. It actually has hundreds and hundreds of different land uses. Any of you who've developed will look at ACHD's fee chart, and it's very, very long. You will pay different if you're a Starbucks with a drive-through than if you're just a Starbucks, and if you have gas next door, that's different. I do not recommend to my clients that they make it so difficult, because I think, as Nampa found, when they very first did impact fees and had all of these different fee levels, it just makes people mad. And so ITD does allow us to do this by category. I mean, the ITE manual does. And I worked with staff to make sure that we were getting a good comparison within these categories to how these are calculated with ACHD. So if you get to the bottom, you'll see that while single-family house is paying $379 now for its portion of signals and bridges, that's what's on your CIP now meaning before this CIP, and we would be charging them $2,800, so $2,400 more than they are now. What would they be getting from that? What would they be buying that's different? This is a rhetorical question. This is to wake you up. Why is it so much higher? You answer.
No, I've talked enough.
Bruce Skog,
There you go.
Council
There you
Member
go.
Skog, why is it so much higher?
Don't you see I'm sleepy down here?
Your eyes were open, so I figured it was fair bait.
Oh, because we're gonna be paying for the growth of the roadways
There you go.
now.
Right.
Instead of putting it on the developer at the development site,
Right.
correct?
Correct. Ding, ding, ding. Gold star, you can go back to sleep now. It's fine. So that's a really good question. So yes, if I'm a developer, and remember we had developers on our impact fee committee because it was really important for them to understand this policy change and think through how it would affect them. If I'm a developer now, I'm going to be asked not only to do this sidewalks and stuff within my own development, but I have got to improve the frontage along the street. I have to give a setback. I have to do that kind of stuff. Have you ever noticed when you're going down a street, it's like wide, narrow, wide, narrow, wide, narrow? So this scalloping comes from only using exactions. Because it could be 40 years before the parcel next to you decides to do it. You never really get that street. The other thing that's not really effective about exactions is by exacting frontage from one property developer, I'm making them pay for all of the people that are going to be driving on that widened street, and that's much more than the people who are just building in my development, right? Everyone is using all of these streets. The easiest way is to think about it with a signal. When you exact a new signal, the first person on the intersection pays for the whole signal. And then we may get the other 3 people to pay them back, but the Walmart a block away doesn't pay for that signal. because it's exacted piece by piece. This is a way to allow everyone who's putting impact on the system to pay their proportional share. Also, and you'll notice in the memo that I gave you, the offset is, if I'm going to pay my proportional share of roadways, then you are not going to also ask me to widen my frontage. You'll notice there's some recommendations about how we kind of overlap this in implementation. If you're already through the process and have started to do your frontage, you don't have to also pay impact fees. But so yeah, that's the difference. That's, if someone says, whoa, why are those fees going up? Because we've never asked development to pay for growth in a system-wide, systematic way. We are doing so, and we are going to increase the amount that residents, existing residents, taxpayers will pay so that we can actually get these roads taken care of. Multifamily goes up about $1,400. Retail stays sort of the same. Who goes up a lot is industrial, because when we are looking at what kind of growth between retail, office, and industrial, what's a lot of Nampa's growth? You have a lot of industrial growth. So industrial is just responsible, even though industrial has less trips generated than retail, there's so much more industrial than retail, they have to pay for a larger portion. Does that make sense? Okay, so here you have this fee schedule. And let's skip to a page I don't have in here. A page that you have in your report, which is, a page you have in your report, which is the cumulative fees. And I think I didn't put it on here because it would be too hard to read. That's a joke because you can't read any of it anyway. Go to page 36 in your big report. It says section 8 summary. And it says, okay, if we add all these fees together, if I am a person building a house, today you're asking me to pay $1,806, and tomorrow you'd have me pay $5,500. So you see that at the bottom, it's just the cumulative of all of these. And so you go, whoa, 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 those are big increases. The next natural question to ask is, well, how do we compare to what other people are charging? Because we know this amount. If every house pays $5,500, we are going to be able to continue level of service. So it's not like we made this number up just to gouge someone. It is the number of what it will cost to provide growth-related infrastructure. The real question people want to know is, by charging these fees, will people not want to build in Nampa? And the funny part of that is actually some cities are figuring out sometimes they don't want people to build, right? Maybe they think they have too much of a land use. But let's pretend you want all the kinds of growth. So you're going to want to look at where else a potential developer might develop. And I've given you all across the valley, all of their cumulative fees. And when I look at the bottom line here for that same single-family home, we're going to have a range of $1,609 for that single-family home in Caldwell, because they do not include roads. So that's the same as us paying $357 today. All the way up to this $5,700 that we see in Star, and that is, you're seeing that alignment, those ones that are up in the 4,000, 5,000 amount, that's because those are ACHD fees. So you're now actually completely comparable. Before it was apples to oranges, now it's apples to apples. If you do go look up at police, that police fee is higher than some of the other police fees. I would say that is a direct reflection of the fact that you have made a commitment to actually hiring more officers. The rest of my clients here have not been able to fund more officers, have not decided. Boise's been talking about building 3 precincts for 10 years, and there's no precinct. Although I think they might actually be getting one. Fire. Your fire fee, as I said, is on the low end, and you'll notice, and this makes sense, because when we get into Eagle and Star, they're growing fast, but there's still less growth, less number of new homes as there are here. So they're having to spread it out over fewer people, and it's higher. Parks, you do have a parks fee that is lower than Star and Middleton. But then pretty much in the middle of the pack, Caldwell, your neighbor, is less. Parks really depends on how good your parks system is, and so you have a really good level of service at 3.2 acres. It's higher than some of these other. Middleton and Star, ironically, have really high levels of service because they had the foresight to put in huge parks. So that is that number. And then streets is, if you look just at streets, you can see how within dollars it compares to the other Ada County cities. I did not use ACHD's data at all. I did this independently, and it came out so closely related to ACHD's that for a geek like me, that just made me really happy, because if you do it independently and it ends up the same, you must be right. So let's get back then to city obligation. And this was a question Councilmember Haverfield asked. How much will the city need to contribute? So when I build your CIPs, I build them for you as elected officials to see the whole picture. If I just showed you an impact fee CIP, you could easily forget that $5 million of apparatus you need to replace, right? I want to put it all in one big place. As a council member, you'll go away tonight thinking, wow, you know, we have a huge obligation for stuff just to keep in business. We're going to have to figure out how to pay for that. But that column divides into two categories, required and discretionary. If we are collecting money from development for a project that is not 100% growth, then we have to be ready to pay the non-growth part so that the building can get built. It's not fair to take all their money and then say, well, we didn't really have the money, that can't happen. So I need to make sure that you at least have that much money. Then the discretionary column is, here are things that were on our CIP that we are in process of thinking about how to fund, but we're not taking any impact fee money from them, so we have no obligation to actually fund this. Luckily, the amount you're required is not more than the discretionary. It's basically streets, so it's the non-growth related part. And here's how this happens. I have a street that's 3 lanes and I'm going to widen it to 5. Part of that road already is there and it's considered an existing facility, so it can't have growth pay for all 5 lanes. They pay for the new lanes and you pay for the middle lanes. That's overly simplistic, but that's why there's a non-growth related part of roadway projects. Oh, good. If the engineer says you're right, then you've really scored for the evening. So that $27 million that's required for streets is your middle lanes of all those roads. Then you'll see there's a $90,000 piece in parks there. That is that softball lighting project. 22% of that project was growth. You need to pay for the other part of that. In the discretionary column, you'll see in the notes that I have to the side, these, for police, this is that training facility. You haven't even begun to talk about that. It's fire apparatus replacement. It is the parks soccer park, trail development, and then for streets, streets, all of yours is required. But then if you look at the bottom, that's saying that the amount you would have to come up with in order to honor your obligations to the impact fee collection would be $2.7 million a year. You are already putting more than that into your CIP every year, so I feel comfortable that you're good for the money. Now, the real conversation is that in order to actually pay for everything you need to pay for, it's closer to the $7 million, so. This is where I put in red at the bottom here, confirm city council intent regarding street project funding. Hold that thought for a moment while I make sure, okay, while I talk about the advisory committee recommendations. So this again was wow, this is a really big change. If you decide to go through with this impact fee update, this is a very different ballgame than what we've been playing before, and it doesn't feel right to change the rules after we've already suited up, right? So these are the 5 recommendations that the committee made when they said, we recommend you do adopt these fees, but the city needs to go through official revisions to the exaction process and how credits work out. We should be able to negotiate applicable fees for developments that are approved but not yet constructed, because all of their funding is dependent on the agreements they've already made with the city, and the terms shouldn't change in the middle. Effective date, 120 days after adoption. Legally, you could go into service 30 days, but the idea is to give the city time to really communicate out so people aren't surprised. Grandfather developments which have already installed frontage improvements, and then really take the effort to communicate out to the public and the development community the why of the changes. And I think that summary document that I've given you is probably a good start at that, how we can kind of boil this all down. So, first I want to say streets. What streets questions do we have? Or this is your time to discuss streets. No, first I guess I should ask, do you understand the math on the streets? Did the CIP make sense? Because that's the least scary part of it, right?
Yes, Randy?
Yeah. Question for you. Discretionary, we're talking about a 10-year period. Where did the 10-year period come from?
State law requires us to just pick a period, and I find that 20 years is too long and 5 is too short. So
So a
10
12 or 15-year
you could,
period.
I'm really only good at dividing by 10, so that tends to be the term I use.
But
It's
when we
pretty
look-
standard to use a 10-year period.
When we're looking at considerable changes to a policy, and if it can be amortized over a little longer period of time, I mean, it's like taking out a 10-year loan versus a 15-year loan. You pay more, or you can pay a little bit less over the same period of time. So the 10-year period, there's nothing magic about that. We're still talking about, or if we look at 12 years, are we just looking at those extra 2 years with the additional amount per year that we're talking about for the first 10?
I'm going to ask you a question of what is your intended outcome of spreading it by 12 years? To reduce the fee a bit?
I'm looking at the impact to the potential economic growth. What concerns me, I can go through some things, but the raise in the industrial rates, those fees are of a concern if we're trying to attract industrial growth in our area. And we're talking about an increase that's exponentially, I don't even know what that is, but it's 1,000%. And yet we would like to attract industrial growth here. What's that saying? It's sending the wrong message. So if we're going to be sensitive to the impact that this is going to have, not only on the home builders, but on the commercial constructors, we have to be very careful, the decisions we make today. And so that's what I'm looking at. I'm not trying to send a message that we don't want to make sure and take care of the roads. That's the egg,
No, not at all.
or the chicken before the egg conversation. We have to have good roads.
You're asking a perfect question, which is the next most obvious question in the conversation. If we adopt these fees, what will it do? You also have an obvious need to expand your tax base.
Right.
So if you increase fees to build roads, but then no one builds here, what was the point of that? Excellent question. And to this I go and I talk to Beth and I say, okay, you're the one who brings in the development that we want. Once again, and as we'll show you in the fiscal impact analysis, not all growth is making you money. Industrial growth is making you money. You're right. That's a good land use. So I'm aware that there are some fakely named developments that are in process with the city, right? So the city's figured out what is the best use for our land, what's going to provide jobs, what's going to give us tax base. Beth goes out there and she reels them in. So Beth and I have talked about this. Okay, here's what we're talking about. What are these types of potential developers going to feel about this fee structure? Now, certainly you'd need to talk to each of them, but any national or regional company who's building a large facility, the type of which would hire numerous employees at a living wage, which I think are the parameters you're hoping for, these fees don't even hit number 10 of the things that they look at. They're looking for access to the freeway, they're looking for skilled labor, they're looking for cheap utilities, they're looking for cheap land, and you have those things. So that's really an excellent question to talk more specifically with Beth about. That just kind of is the answer about that. One of the options you have, here's something that Nampa did many years ago that didn't work out so well. They said, well, we know this is the CIP and the cost, but we really don't want to make people pay that amount. So we'll just have them pay half of that amount. And I went, I don't think that's a very good idea, but that's what they did. And then later they said, well, how come we never have enough money to pay for these projects? Because you're only collecting half of the money. So we ended up with this deferred balance. If you are worried that a specific fee level is going to deter or provide a disincentive to a specific type of development that you know is beneficial to the city, I would suggest a better way to handle that is to have a conversation on the economic development side of, would the city want to help subsidize some of their impact fee? I mean, if that person told Beth, hey, your impact fees are going up, I'm out of here, I'm not coming to Nampa. If they're that good of a win, the city might want to put some general fund money in to subsidize it. That's like investing in economic development, right? That's a no-brainer. So that's a way that I can really get you to specifically address the specific developments that you're worried about disincenting, rather than under-collecting across the board. Are you understanding kind of?
Well, it can be confusing, obviously.
It's very confusing.
But are we expecting them to create other incentives, is what you're saying? Keep the fees as you're determining that they should be, but providing some other means of incentive, whether it's through urban renewal or whether it's...
Well, no, actually, I mean, I'm being overly simplistic, and really you would need with your attorney and with Beth to specifically talk through this. But an example in Salt Lake is we put in our ordinance that in cases of affordable housing, they would not have to pay the impact fee, the city's housing trust would pay for it. So what I'm saying is, if it is important enough to the city to not have them pay their own impact fees, someone has to pay it. So you take it out of fund balance, or, I mean, you expend taxpayer money to get a thing that you know is beneficial for taxpayers. You probably wouldn't want to do that for retail, because retail just drains your resources and doesn't actually give you much of a return. So I'm just saying, I would suggest you be really surgical about where you're concerned this really will provide a disincentive, and let's go away and talk about how, first of all, are our fears founded? Will these people go away with these new fees? And then two, if they are, how can we balance that out?
Thank you. It's a good explanation.
It would be interesting to me as I'm looking at the industrial numbers, because we're not that far off, other than Caldwell.
Right.
We're not that far off from Boise or Meridian, we're 4 cents less. But, Boise's 193, Eagle 191, Star 196. So have you done any calculations for what that would look like on a development? I'm just trying to think what our average growth, did you do any of the speculative, like the average industrial growth, how many square feet is it? I know Ron's out there, he may have figured that one out. Wherever you're sitting, oh, there you are. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know, I'm just trying to think what those numbers are, but
What I did
we're not
was
that far off.
look to Ron in the advisory committee, and when he didn't throw things at me, I figured we were good to go. So
There you go.
I might have bought you lunch once, too. Do you think that was... No, I never did. You guys got nothing. This was a purely transparent process. Yes, you're right. Rather than me guessing, that's why we have development members on the community. We have a commercial developer who is a perfect person to ask.
I just have a quick question. I probably don't understand the right formula for the tax incentives for businesses to, like industrial to come to Nampa, because there's so much involved in that. But answer this question, though, in terms of impact fees, in an urban renewal area, what does that do? Where is that, I mean, is it more from urban renewal districts, or is it not?
I'm not sure, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to say that.
I think you're asking the question. So, for example, some people have had a misunderstanding that the taxes they pay into an urban renewal district are more, or that they pay more.
Thank you. Right.
They don't pay any more, they pay the same amount. It's just that those dollars go into the urban renewal district. The question is on impact fees, where do those fees go if they're in the urban renewal district?
Ooh,
That's, I think, the
excellent,
question.
Excellent.
That's what I was, thank you.
Excellent question, council member. You have your Saturday Night Live translator going for you.
She's good.
She's very good. Impact fees are totally separate, has nothing to do with the urban renewal. The impact fees will go to the city, they will stay in their own account, not mixed with the general fund. And obviously, all of the work that you'll be doing on a city scale will definitely positively impact your urban renewal, but they're not even related,
Not
never talked
related.
about in the same conversation.
Okay, that's what I wanted to do. Thank you.
Good question.
Thank you.
So are you wanting some specific feedback from the council on
Pretty
the,
much done here, so.
you're pretty much done. So what would you like from us at this point?
I think, the first thing, because I don't know where you all are, is if you all knew tonight that you as a council had talked through enough of your intention to increase funding for streets, that would make me know that I can defend the numbers that I have here. If you said, I've never heard of this, or no way, we're not going to do it, and you don't have to be specific how you do it, but then I would say we need to go back and reduce the number of projects then, because if you can't pay your portion, we need to fiscally constrain it further. If you were to say tonight, yep, we know about this, it's our intention, we haven't worked out all the details, but we're moving toward that place. If you were to say we generally understand the methodology, we feel like it was done properly, we hear what the advisory committee has said, and they've given their recommendation, you might say, we'd like you to go forward and do the two next steps, one of which is having planning and zoning amend the CIPs into the comp plan. That's just part of the Land Use Planning Act, as part of the statute. And then it will come back to you for a public hearing because it's a fee. So you don't have to make a decision until it comes back to you for a fee. If you have major policy questions or concerns, this is where you would say, let's step back and look at this a little bit more carefully before we go to the next step.
So I would say, council, I think where we've seen this discussion is through the Transportation Master Plan. Those that have sat in the Transportation Master Plan meetings, all of these examples, funding opportunities have been brought forth through that process. We've not discussed it as a council, I don't think. Am I correct in saying that? But you've been exposed to it through the Transportation Master Plan, so you may all be aware of those different options to discuss how we could, whether it be when the GO bond expires, being able to allocate some funds and use foregone at that time, which would not increase taxes at all. It just wouldn't reduce them as fast, but it would fund streets. Or we've not taken any action on a registration fee increase. That said, Meridian is doing it right now. They're so far ahead of us on funding because they're actually funding streets. So I know for my position is, as a community, when we look at growth, what the citizens have said is that streets and public safety are important to them in this community. If we want to attract industry, if we want to attract growth, we have to have something to attract them to. And if we are at the bottom of the barrel in our community when it comes to public safety and roads, then we're going to have a hard time attracting The other thing that I know that I've listened to, it's very loud and clear from our citizens. Our citizens are saying growth has got to fund growth. And that's been a very consistent message and a very loud message. So with that, it's the will of the council, though, how to move forward.
Madam Mayor, we need to move ahead for sure. Just a quick question, though, Mayor and Ann. On the advisory committee, was it unanimous as far as approval of this?
Yes.
And we had, I should know this, but what was the breakdown? Commercial development,
By law, it
residential?
has to be at least 40% development community, but we have Ron Van Acker, a commercial developer. We have Kip Kinsler, who's not only a residential developer, but the BCA representative. We have David Bills, who is a developer as well. We had Sandy, who is a, what? Sharon. Sandy. Sharon. We had Sharon and Larry, who are sort of at-large citizen perspective.
Okay.
And then Councilmember Haverfeld was on as a non-voting member. So they were all involved in all of these conversations.
So the formulas and everything that you have presented before us today, that,
They have touched every part of this.
okay.
Ad nauseum at times, really.
Mayor Quinn, and the developers that were in that, on the advisory committee, did they reach out to the development community? Chip through the Snake River Valley BCA, did he speak to them to get their impact or their insight?
Not before now,
Okay,
no. I wanted to get to this point. My vote was basically to take it to you guys, so we could get to the public hearing point of it, so we could be represented as a whole.
so at what point in time are you ready to speak on behalf of the development community, the impacts that we're talking about right now?
Well, we've been in talks a little bit this week. We haven't gone into it by detail yet because I wanted this meeting to happen first. So we probably need to convene within the next week or two to talk as a group to see how we want to proceed with council.
Mayor Kling, is this meant to be just a conversational time? Are we going to have actual open public hearing on this? or is-
We will have a public hearing on this before we have an official vote. At this time, though, I think if we were, do we need a vote to move it forward to the next level? Because the next step, go ahead and explain the next step with P and Z, and then it would come back to the council as a public hearing.
So P and Z would just, if you feel comfortable that the capital improvement plans reflect your intention about projects that you want to do, it doesn't bind you at all to fund them or to adopt the impact fees. P and Z could amend them into the comp plan saying, yes, and here are the actual projects that we're anticipating to do in each of these chapters of the comp plan to execute the strategy. So there's no risk there, unless you don't like the CIPs. If you don't like the CIPs, we need to fix that now. Then it will come back to you with that kind of administrative part done. You'll have a public hearing, you'll close the public hearing, and then you can do whatever you want at that point.
Well, I'm-
So the public hearing could be the place at which BCA
Right.
officially gives their position. In some cases, BCA will submit a letter, and in some cases, BCA will not support or disagree. It could be any of those things.
Mayor Kling, I would be in favor, if we had to have a motion, the motion would be to move it to the point where we can have a public hearing when Beth could speak on behalf of the economic development side, where the Contractors Association could speak on their behalf. Beth could maybe speak on behalf of the potential industrial users that might or might not consider Nampa moving forward if these were truly too much. The only question I would have for you, Ann, is you had in a private, memo to just the advisory committee, you had listed 10 roadway projects as a part of the growth-related portion. Are those identified anywhere at this point?
If you look at the CIP, the first 32 projects are signals and intersections, and the last 10 projects are roadway projects.
Okay.
And one day, when Jeff actually gives you the big version of the CIP, you'll have all, it's just, I had to hide some of the columns because you would never have been able to see it, but there are some columns that tell you segments and specific type of project, and so all of that is certainly going to be made available to you. You'll be able to look at that specifically, but there are 10. Now, one thing I should mention is there's this sort of outlier on the CIP, which is a $90 million project for State Highway 16. Only $250,000 of that project would come from the city. So that's a big number that kind of, it's in the purple part of that pie chart, and you can kind of just not worry about that. I mean, you could worry about it if you wanted to, but I would focus on the other roadway projects because they've been forwarded to you as the top priority roadway projects. Correct?
Mayor Glenn, and I would agree that we probably, and we should move forward on this issue and wait to the public hearing for hearing from our community and especially our builders to see what they would want. But I would agree we go forward.
So, Mayor, are we making a motion? And I thought I heard a motion from Councilman Haverfield. Was that are we?
Just to move it to a public hearing,
Yeah, you made a motion to do that, correct?
if that's appropriate.
Madam Mayor, it's not an action item though tonight.
I need clarity, because Deb, I see a vote, your document right there, so I need the clarity on that. Do we need a vote tonight
I
to
thought it was discussion.
just discussion only?
That's what it was listed as.
So just the process alone, and that's what I need to know, just the process alone takes us to the public hearing. If we all just do the nod to say, you know what, we're good with it going to the public
It's not
hearing.
really an action item.
Yeah.
You're just not stopping me at this point.
Right. I do have a question on process, though. So does it have to go to P and Z for the rewrite before it comes to public hearing? Because you mentioned that as the next step, or can it come as a public hearing next? I'm not sure if it has to go to P and Z first.
The way we've always done it, and so I'm deferring to how legal has always had me do it, is first and then the second. But it doesn't actually in the statute say that they have to be in an order. I think what you could do is have P and Z hold the hearing for anyone to comment on the CIP, because they're not commenting on the impact fees. They're just commenting on, hey, are these projects good projects for Nampa or not? And then they could close the public hearing. You could have them not take final action on it until you had your public hearing. And then if you said, forget this, scrub it, not going to do it, then nothing would have happened to the comp plan. Am I addressing your concern?
I think so, because I hate to see a lot of work go into something if it is yet to come here.
But I don't think that we can have you adopt the fees without without it being amended, at least in a pretty short parallel period of time.
So the next step would be public hearing, P and Z, to confirm the capital improvement plan.
Yes.
Okay, and then it would come to us as a public hearing.
And I also just need to disclose, I'm not an attorney, so don't. I like to pretend I am, but I'm not an attorney.
So what is the will of the council? Is that the process that we're all in agreement in moving?
Yeah, if this is similar to the budget, we can't add, but we can take away. And so if what you're asking for is whether or not it's the will of council to tell you to take some things off right now, I'm not prepared to tell you what line items on this report to take off. So I'd say to proceed, and if we need to slice and dice and edit, my understanding is we can do that along in the process.
Yes, you'll close the public hearing. I mean, the public hearing really will be general perspectives about these strategy changes you're taking in impact fees. I mean, it will be referring to the specific fee amounts that we've put forward. But if based on that amount you said, let's constrain the CIP a little bit more, then you would tell us what projects to take out or what to not collect from the growth. And then you wouldn't actually schedule it for adoption, which would have to be, I mean, some do it in the same night if they know what they're doing, but you would just wait until all that been done, we'll bring it back to you, and then you can actually put it on your agenda for an adoption. So you have stops at each point.
You know, the other thing that we're in the midst of is our comp plan review. And I'm sitting here thinking, we've got on November 15th a comp plan review, a meeting, and we're talking about land use. And it would be interesting, I don't want to complicate things, but we do want the input of the community on this. That might be an opportunity to get further input from the community on the CIP plan. Right, the CIP. It's just a thought. So that would be we'll talk about that. I don't know if Norm's here, but yeah. There isn't anything that would say we couldn't do that, is that correct? From a
No, I mean,
process
I
standpoint?
think, I wish more cities actually did do a capital conversation in their comp plan reviews, because often we don't connect the idea of growth with the actual dollars of growth. So even though we won't talk about fees, I think the people involved in the comp plan revision, it would be helpful to know what kind of infrastructure system the city is intending to provide to support the planning strategies that are in the comp plan.
Okay, thank you. I think that might be something that we consider. Randy?
So without giving away anything, the extension of Highway 16 to the interstate in and around the, what do they call it? Can we call it Amazon yet? Bronco.
Project Bronco.
Did I hear you say that we don't need to be concerned about that infrastructure growth in that general area?
All I'm saying is the $195 million CIP, 90 million of that is that project, only a teeny portion of which is actually going to be your obligation. So I just wanted to clarify that when I said there were 10 roadway projects, one of them is this huge project that really doesn't have a ton to do with you in terms of funding. So I just wanted to clarify that if you were looking at the list of projects, wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on that project. I would look at the ones that are right in your city.
So the 10 projects that you outlined are not, obviously, is it in and around that area?
No, these are,
We don't need to get into specifics about it, but
McDermott, that's the first one. No, what's the bottom 10 projects on the CIP are roadway projects. And they're in various parts of town based on the immediate need, the ones that are most focused on growth, the result of the Transportation Master Plan update. So the update said, the update actually said, these are the 40 most important projects, and Tom was able to take 10 of them into the CIP to keep things within a fundable level.
and
So you
maybe-
could say, hey, such and such a project's not on the CIP, why not? And Tom and Jeff would say, well, we don't have design ready, or there's some legal problem, or whatever, and that's why we put it below the line. So that would be a good use of your time to look through the CIP in that way and say, is there a street project you think is missing, or one that you think is not supposed to be on there?
So my question again is Highway 16 planned on being connected to the interstate as a part of that project? Do you know that?
I can answer that a little bit. So ITD is having some workshops right now. And the biggest discussion in the last workshop was how to, well, Jeff and I were at different tables, so I'm not sure what your table said versus our table, but our table basically said to work on it incrementally, Highway 16, and there's huge discussion outside of Project Bronco, whether it comes or doesn't come, any of that, as to whether or not they start the improvements on the, out towards Eagle Road and bring it towards the freeway, or start at the freeway. And a lot of people feel strongly it should start at the other end and come out, but Project Bronco does fundamentally could shift that, but there's considerable concern about an exit off the freeway that doesn't have any place to go. Because when those cars get off the freeway, other than if you're trying to provide access for a specific project, the road infrastructure wouldn't be able to handle it. So there's considerable discussion right now about which direction to go, and it hasn't been determined. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah, that's where my concern is, because the impact of traffic in and around that area will be, I mean, it's something that we have to pay attention to. If the state's taking care of it, great. If we're having to have to plan for a portion of, our portion of it, how much is that portion? You said it was minor. So we shouldn't be focused on it. Is there still a question on whether that's going to happen or not? Has it not been determined?
It hasn't been determined.
Okay.
It's
So
still in
it's
discussion.
included only in the CIP because, hey, we know this is a big issue for growth in the city, and as of today, it looks like we might spend $250,000 on it. So we want to include that in this process so that we don't lose that. 2 weeks from now, the deal could change, and you'd need to update how it changes, but this is at least getting it on the CIP to acknowledge its importance in serving growth, and to put at least a placeholder for the amount the city might have to contribute to that project.
I'm going to ask, did I answer that correctly? Okay, I just want to make sure I didn't make any errors between our communication flows at different times.
Don't you like how we both just answer and then we'll see if it's right? I think we're getting pretty good at this, Mayor.
Okay, so are we, just that nod from the council, are we all on the same page?
Yeah.
We are? Okay. Yep. Okay, I think you got your answer.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, appreciate it. And thank you to all of you that are interested.
Are you waving?
And Chip, do you have a question?
So the one question that I haven't heard answered from the council is the answer of intent to fund the city's part of the streets, which has never been funded before by the city. So, haven't been answered. So before you can move forward on this, that intent question that Ann's been asking has to be answered, I think.
Well, Mayor, if I may, we have made a commitment as a council to start funding what hasn't been funded in the past, and that's where 1% of the 3% increase that were allowed has been going directly to road improvements and infrastructure. So, I don't think that's a fair question, or a fair statement on your part. We are making the effort. The question now is, do we want to double it moving forward? Because we're currently funding at about 3 million. Is that correct? 3.5. So we're talking about doubling that as our commitment as a city. So that's where we have to make sure, moving forward, that the commitment that we're asking you guys, or you to make, are we matching it from our standpoint?
Right, and
Right.
I think that's the intent that she was asking for is, we know you committed to the 1%, but above and beyond that, we can't go forward with this plan without.
Well, and that's where the dialogue needs to be further. You coming forward to speak on behalf of the development community, listening to what Beth has to say. As a council, being able to understand and get the merit out of your comments, and then build that case that we can work with, because we still have to respect the will of the taxpayers in general, and yet look at what kind of message you're going to send to the economic or the development community as well. We don't want to cut our own throat in an effort that leaves us wondering why they're bypassing us and moving to Caldwell with industrial growth or elsewhere. So I think we're trying to do right by both of you, citizens and the development community. That's the way I see it anyway.
Right, I'm not trying to get under anybody's skin, I was just making sure that the question that she was asking got answered before you move forward on this. Impact.
We would have to, it's going to be a vote of the people also. If we decided to go ahead and ask the people about raising the impact fees, that's a decision that's a vote. I don't think that's a decision, I'm sorry, not impact fee, registration fees, the vehicle registration fees. So that isn't us alone. We could say, you know what, let's put it before the people. We're so much lower than Ada County. I think the people are going to have to say, yes, I'm willing to, and those funds come back here. But there's a lot that goes into just the process to go there. So we could say we have an intent, but it's not going to be done
Right,
immediately.
Intent is different than done.
Yeah.
So what I hear Randy saying and you, and I look at Rick nodding and saying, okay, I think that our intent is to fund it, let's see how it goes forward from here, and that's all I think Ann's asking.
Well, we haven't, what I alluded to earlier is the transportation master plan. There's been helpful charts and funding mechanisms. I've been doing the math, and I realize that we don't have the budget capacity to do that, and what the police are asking, and what other departments, that doesn't even take into account hiring new employees over the next 10 years. And so, in my simple head, I realize that the budget capacity isn't there over 10 years. And what I'm probably guessing you're getting at is if we're collecting impact fees, we have to match that. I don't think the public's fully aware of that. We are committing to spending more in our budget, or else you're going to be suing the city, or we're going to have legal problems because we've over-collected and not matched and maintained the quality through the budget mechanism. So we have not had this sort of 30,000-foot conversation on the council, and I've been waiting for that conversation because I've been in the transportation workshops. I've been seeing how money has been suggested, different ways of funding mechanisms, but we have not had that conversation. So I just want to be clear that what I'm saying yes to today is to proceeding with the deliberation in the process. I was not voting on a budget for the next 10 years right now,
Right.
so, to be clear. Okay.
And I would make the point too, that's why I asked the question about deferring it to 12 or 15 years, looking at, do we have to fund all 10 projects, or can we fund less than 10? Looking at doing the math so that we can make it work from a council perspective with our budgets that, we're limited to. So that's where the question is, sure, if we had a pot of gold to draw out, that would be great, but we don't. So we have to look at what our capabilities are.
Madam Mayor, council members, this is a perfect conversation, and you are right in the place we want you to be, which is planning, hard question. So we've done all the planning, and it's all in front of you, and we can't go any further with Transportation Master Plan or with impact fees without that conversation, and that's really just among all of you. It may require, it's probably a work session with all of you and diving deep and meeting with Vicki and talking about that. We can certainly hold the impact fee public hearing. I would imagine the BCA would probably come and say what Chip just said, and that's sort of right, saying, well, unless you can fund your part, you can't adopt these for us. I would think it would be really a good time to have that conversation now among all of you, and we might just step back for a little bit, because you do need to make this, you need to make this decision at some point, and this process is actually holding you hostage, so that's sort of good, isn't it?
Tom?
I have some slides that if we could take maybe, it won't take long, maybe 5 minutes, to kind of show you what's been talked about in the Transportation Master Plan. I want to make sure that everyone goes out here with correct information.
You're just going to have to nail down with that mic.
I'm just going to skip ahead to this plan. So this is the plan that we showed in the Transportation Master Plan workshop. So it shows the need, which is this blue line over time. It ramps up, in the beginning and levels off and goes down. And this is the revenue. So, you've heard a lot from me about that we can fund transportation in 15 years, right? And actually, everything on this graph is something that the city council could control. And so into the formulas on all of this is a 1% per year property tax increase out of the 3% that you're available to take. And a reminder that you have been taking a 1% per year already for about 3 years now. So this is continuing that 1% per year out of the 3 for a 10-year period, okay? And then in this plan, it also shows, where's a lot of talk about the GO bond and the reallocation of GO bond. So there's the GO bond is $2.7 million per year that's being paid. And so to in this plan, we realize that there's not, just as only taking 1% out of 3% to fund streets, we know that there's needs in parks and police and fire. We weren't assuming that all of that would go back into it. So this plan took in $500,000 out of the $2.7 million. So, that's, and actually, when we ran the numbers, you don't even have to take any of the GO bond money in order to match what we're talking about for street funds, for impact fees. If you just did the 1%, you can get there.
In 15 years? So,
Well, in 10 years, you'd have to have 10-year, you'd be matching the 10-year increment of the CIP, the 1%, 1%, 1% per year. Does that
so
make
if we do that every year for the next 10 years, we would have the funds to match the impact fees?
sense? Yeah, you'll have the 27 million.
If we just at the 1% that we're currently doing today?
Yep.
Okay? That's important to know.
That's around the 30 million, right? I mean, he's the mathematician, but,
Yep.
yeah, okay.
So it's all, you've been doing it already, and it's just continuation of the plan. And this plan was put together to, show you it can be done, because it can be done if, and, these are the different funding sources that would come in to get to that amount that we're talking about funding the plan. You see these would be the new sources coming in at the 1%, that cumulative over time. And then these are the grants that we continue to go after, this green bar here. And then the impact fee is coming up along with it. So it's not all just one source. It's, like we're saying, we're using some grants, some impact fees, and some property tax increase to get there.
So, Madam Mayor, if I may, Tom, so there was some discussion of automobile registration increase in fees.
Yep.
So is what I'm hearing you say, at this point, if this plan goes forward as spoken of, that would not be needed?
That's not needed.
Okay.
However, if we wanted to increase because right now, aside from impact fees, that's all for new growth. The other need that we have in our community is
I
actually.
know extra
care.
money, I'm just saying that
Right.
this could
Yeah.
happen without that we
That's a
don't
good
have
question.
that revenue, okay?
Yep.
Mayor Kling, that chart that you just showed, that's growth dependent, though. We have to keep seeing the growth happening for that to work out. If we have a downturn in the economy, we don't have impact fees being collected, and we don't have growth.
Perfect about it is
That's where that
not
other,
growing, you don't get the red or the blue, and you just don't build the projects. But we're staying connected in how much impact fees and general fund are paying. Sorry, I just jumped right in there.
That's okay.
and that's back to Darrell's question as far as on those increases in the registration.
That could be evaluated on a whatever annual basis or whatever.
So the reason that we're bringing registration fee into the mix, so our Jeff and I's vision for transportation, and we heard about we're bringing in a constrained list, so we're constraining the amount of projects we bring in. We're not getting everything that needs to be done according to the ultimate plan, right? So the step one is do what city council can control, which is raise the property tax, raise the impact fee. That's step one. Step two would be the registration fee. So that would bring in additional funds not only for Nampa, but for the entire county. So that's, we're talking about funding the plan is where these two lines merge. So in this example, it'd be at 12 years. But you have all this backlog here at the end that you need to take care of, right, that you didn't get done. So that's where the additional funds and registration fee would come in. It would take care of that backlog. Does that make sense?
How many years is that from the beginning to where we actually fund? So that's 12 years beginning in 18, right, or 19?
That's right, in 18.
Okay,
So
so
that-
12 years, okay.
Mayor, this is we put this graph together just to show illustration. So this is funding the plan in 15 years with the 1%, 1%, 1%. So, and then the 500,000 out of the 2.7 million in GO bond allocation. So if the city council decided they want to try to get there faster and close this gap, which is a totally council's decision, if you wanted to do the whole 2.5 million back towards transportation, you'd fund it in 12 years instead of 15. So you're narrowing the gap. But that, of course, that's a decision that doesn't have to be made today. You don't need to have the bonds to increase the impact fee. You just need to do the 1% increases over time.
Madam Mayor, fellow council members, so to answer your questions, Ann and others, I'm grateful for the work. I want to follow the impact fee recommendation generally, unless some other information comes forward in public hearing. I'm in favor of everything except using any foregone in the future. So that's where I stand. I like the streets plan. It's well done. I think it's workable, and it gave me hope when I went through it with you guys. So I couldn't make the meeting because I was out of town, but I did go over things with Tom. It's a good plan.
Thank you for your comments, Bruce. Are there any other comments? Mandy?
Just wanted to make a comment and kind of follow up with what Councilman Hogaboam said. We probably all on the council have heard constantly from the community. They comment, we have got to make development pay for itself, the growth pay for itself. We're tired of this. But one of the things today that was mentioned, which I believe is going to be very valuable for us to point out at a public hearing, is the fact that if we want to raise our impact fees, we're going to have a commitment from our citizens as well, because the part that they're not getting is the fact that we are committed as a city to make a commitment, to make a match. And they don't understand that in my conversations and listening to them. And going back to your deep dives at the end of, at the beginning of the year, public safety and our roads were their 1 and 2 concerns. Well, if they're really their concerns, they're going to have to understand that if they want their impact fees and growth to be paying for itself, they're going to have to be committing to have a property tax increase on the same time, at the same time, excuse me. So education, I guess, is what I'm saying, is it's really going to be important to get that education key out there. And the other piece is that I heard it mentioned that in our public hearing, it's going to be very valuable to hear from economic development. It's going to be valuable to hear from the development community, which I totally agree. But the really important part of that equation is our citizens. We have to be able to hear from them and hear what they're saying after they've been properly educated.
One thing that's interesting is that from a park standpoint, some of the parks, there's not a whole lot of match policed. It's growth, and where on these charts, they're 100% funded by impact fees because it's strictly growth. Streets and roads are an anomaly that make it, it's a different model, which you're talking about, but our state statute, the way it's written today, it's old, and it really doesn't accommodate a city like Nampa within the county and within the highway districts, and we're going to have to address that sometime in the near future, because the model is not a model that helps us fund streets. That's why Ada County moved to ACHD. Now, some people don't like that model. And when I talk about this, I have to say that we have some amazing people that work with our highway districts. So I don't want it to be a negative, because they're awesome people doing a great job. But when you look at the model of the size of our city, 72% of the fees that are collected for the highways come to, let's say, I think it's just Highway District 1, comes from the city of Nampa. We only get 42% of that back. And so for us, Meridian, like I said earlier, the other cities in Ada County, they're not having to take general fund taxes and fund their streets. So when we talk about our taxes going down, that's one of the areas that we need to look at. How do we do this differently? So for me, it's a longer-term strategy, sometime in the next year to 5 years maybe. I don't know how long it'll take, but we need to address that, because long-term, our model is somewhat broken. It's old in the statute, and we need to do it differently, because the goal here is get taxes down. Okay, Bruce, I think you're done.
I apologize, Mayor. I have a meeting scheduled 6:30. I didn't know this was going to go past 6.
Well, I think if we're done, I would stand for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Yeah, that was fast.
That was fast.